Tantor Audio presents Thicker Than Blood by Madeline Sheehan and Claire C. Riley. Narrated by C.J. Bloom. Prologue. The zombie apocalypse didn't happen like it does in the movies. Disaster didn't strike when we weren't looking. No, we were all looking. We were all waiting. It was a slow trickle that began with a nightly news broadcast. Yet another disease, another epidemic, was sweeping through the third world with crippling effects, decimating entire villages within mere days. The Val fever, they'd called it, and it took no mercy on its victims. Men, women, and children alike were ravaged by the disease, and most perished as a result. Only they didn't stay dead. They awoke and attacked the survivors, spreading the virus through both their saliva and blood. And what could we do? Like all the other pandemics we'd lived through, we could do nothing but hope that the Centers for Disease Control could put a stop to it, or that the armed forces would protect us and ensure it wouldn't spread. So we hoped, and we waited, trying not to worry. We went about our daily lives. Like usual, we woke up every morning. We went to work and to school. We continued talking, laughing, living. But in the back of our minds, we were waiting. 7 billion people were all waiting. That slow trickle grew, becoming a flood as more reports streamed in from all over the world. As a nation, we stayed glued to our radios, to our televisions, to the internet, watching helplessly as the pandemic continued to spread. After that, governments worldwide took aggressive action to stop the disease from entering their countries. Airports shut down, shipping companies refused to sail, importing and exporting were no more. Then the floodgates broke, and we learned the truth. There was no treatment. There was no cure. Africa was the first to succumb, then China, and Russia quickly followed. Suddenly, our usually busy, bustling lives came to a standstill. Supermarkets and drugstores began limiting bulk purchases. Generators were suddenly in great demand, and people had begun wearing face masks. Others stopped going to work altogether, refusing to leave their homes in order to avoid any sort of contact with other people. When we got word that the disease had found its way to Europe and South America, panic, birthed from fear and helplessness, turned to violence. The American army wasn't big enough, wasn't quick enough, wasn't prepared enough for the sheer magnitude of the public outcry. Because of their lack of planning, a civil war broke out between the army and the citizens they were meant to protect. As a result, entire cities went down in flames before the disease had even reached American soil. But when it did, when the first American fell to his knees, the government was ill-prepared for the fallout, and the sickness spread like wildfire. Indiscriminate, it took the weak, the strong, the young, and the old. Before long, news reports and radio broadcasts were no more. The airwaves were filled with nothing but static. Our neighborhoods, our cities and states, the entire country, the whole world, all went silent. When the world awoke again, it awoke with a rattling groan that promised only misery and loss, and eventually, death. Chapter 1. Leisel. There was blood everywhere, on the bed, on the walls, on the floor. Some had even managed to find its way to the ceiling. I looked down at my red-stained hands, at my naked body. It was all over me, coating the pale freckled skin on my arms, torso, legs, and feet. It was everywhere. I hadn't seen so much blood in one place well, not in the past 4 years, since I'd been living in this sanctuary from the outside world. A small manic laugh escaped my dry and scratchy throat, bubbling past my lips. A sanctuary? Well, it might be for most, but that wasn't the case for everyone, and least of all for me. This place, Fredericksville, a once small and quiet town, and my current home, was one of the last known functioning towns left in the country, and for all intents and purposes, it was a safe place to live. Families survived within, protected by fortified walls and guarded by armed men who kept us safe from the numerous threats from outside. We had a leader, one man, and a council of sorts, composed of a small group of men who created our laws. Together they devised a system of checks and balances to keep the peace. Everyone had a job to do, determined by whatever skills one possessed in the old world. Women who could sew were still sewing, and teachers like myself were still teaching. Men who could build were still building. Chefs were still cooking. Farmers were still farming. Police were still policing. Soldiers were still fighting. Officials were still officiating. And our leader? I looked up, away from my bloodied skin and across the dimly lit room to where an equally naked and bloodied body lay still on the bed. My husband, Lawrence Whitney, the leader of our community, was now dead and no longer leading. Another laugh bubbled up, and my eyes began to water. I'd killed my husband, a man who wasn't just a man but was the man in charge, the most powerful man in my world. And no matter how broken this world might be, murder was still a crime, at least behind these walls, and subsequently punishable by death. There would be no trial, no defense attorney to help me present my tale of woe to a jury of my peers, to showcase the bruises, new and old, that covered my body. No one would help me explain the real reason why my visits to the infirmary were more frequent than most, why I often had one arm in a sling, why sunglasses always hid my eyes, and why I could occasionally be seen hobbling on a pair of crutches. When it came to committing murder in this new world, the only thing one had to look forward to was death. Without the resources or space to house a long-term prison, the people of Fredericksville had little choice but to quickly and efficiently end the lives of their violent offenders. I'd known this, and still, I'd allowed my emotions to get the better of me, allowed my pain to cloud my judgment, allowed my fear to take control, to rear its ugly head and end the source of my misery, my prison, once and for all. Oh God, why? Why had I done this? And here, in our home of all places. There was no escape, no running and hiding from this mess I'd made, not within the confines of a walled town surrounded by armed men. The very same men who would be at our door at the first sign of morning light, ready to escort my husband on his daily duties, only to find him brutally murdered, and me the blood-stained and obvious culprit. If they didn't kill me outright, I would be taken into custody immediately, not allowed to see or speak to anyone. Within an hour of my apprehension, my crime would be known to all. Word traveled fast in such a small community, especially one with little in the way of modern entertainment. There was no television to be watched, no cell phones to keep us busy, and what little electricity that was harnessed from the nearby river was used solely for communication purposes within Fredericksville, lighting the community buildings and providing a small amount of refrigeration in the cookhouse. Face-to-face gossip was our only source of entertainment, because it was all we had left. I had a day left, maybe two, until everyone would be gathered on the main drag, where justice would be swiftly meted out. A public execution, a single bullet to my head, would provide a warning to all who might at some point be inclined to take the law into their own hands, as I had so stupidly done. The infection had efficiently ended society as we'd known it. In the midst of the destruction, a new world had arisen with a survival of the fittest, better him than me philosophy, the sort of archaic thinking that asserted that men and women were not equals. As for justice, it too was a thing of the past. We simply survived. I sank to the cold tile floor, dropping to my knees with my arms outstretched in supplication. But who my pleading was for, I didn't know. Did we fall to our knees when we knew we had nothing left, nowhere else to go but down? Was I subconsciously asking God for mercy, for forgiveness, or for a savior? My thoughts were scrambled, the fear at the forefront of my mind, muddling everything else. "Why?" I whispered to the floor. "Why?" Confused, I was unable to finish my question, not knowing what my question was. Or maybe I did know. Maybe I knew exactly what my question was. Maybe I wasn't asking why this particular and most recent tragedy had happened, but why it had all happened. All of it. Why any of this had happened. But there were no answers to be found. There never were. Only emptiness and consequences. I wished with all my heart that I could have been stronger, able to endure this new world, this new reality with equanimity and grace. As I stared off into nothing, I thought of Evelyn, my beautiful and courageous friend. Evelyn had endured as much as I had, been forced from her quiet, happy life as I had also lost the man she loved, and alongside me had been thrust into this cruel and cold world. Like me, she had been forced to marry a man she hadn't loved, forced to live a life she hadn't wanted. She had been forced to become a woman she wasn't, had never known how to be. But unlike me, she hadn't crumpled. She'd become an even stronger version of herself. Evelyn was capable of taking on whatever misery life decided to throw her way, embracing it even, utilizing it, molding it to her liking, and forever persevering. I had done the opposite. Grief had consumed me, caused me to turn in on myself instead of facing my demons head on. They'd piled up inside and eaten away at me, rendered me useless, unable to function properly, and created a whole new set of hardships. My demons were always growing, welling up within me, until they were too many to name or count, let alone deal with. And so I'd snapped, unable to take another second of it, of this life, of his fist colliding with my face, of his body crudely taking what I wasn't offering, of his harsh words often followed by laughter and scorn. I'd snapped, and there my consequences lay, bloody, mangled, dead on our marriage bed. But even dead and finally silent, I could still hear his laughter. It echoed loudly throughout this old building, bouncing off the walls, coming at me from every direction. "You're worthless, Leisel. You're nothing. No one. Do you hear me? You're nothing, Leisel, nothing. You're a hole to fuck, a pretty face and an empty head, a stupid good-for-nothing." And his hand would crack across my face, causing me to stumble, to cry out in pain and fall at his feet. He would laugh again and again, call me more names, blame me for my inability to produce a child, and then more tears would fall. From those tears of pain and humiliation came the worst consequence of all. My pain, my anguish, and my agony made him feel his most powerful, victorious, and, like all men who succumb to bloodlust, I was his prize to be taken. Only tonight, there had been too many tears, too much pain, and while he'd continued to ravage me, hurting me, suddenly I'd gone numb to it all. Numb and then angry. And as he slept, I'd paced. I'd mumbled, crying, cradling the sore places on my body. I'd paced until the anger had taken over. Too many thoughts inside of me, too many voices shouting at me, too much pain radiating from my skin and from my broken heart, too many unanswered questions spiraling around and around. And then all of a sudden, I could no longer bear it. Bear another second of hearing him snore so peacefully, without a care in the world. After my world had been destroyed and he'd forced me into his world of misery, of my misery, and suddenly the knife he kept in his boot was glaring at me from across the room, a shiny beacon in the fog that I'd become, and the beacon was beckoning me, screaming at me until it was all I could hear, all I could see, and so I took that knife from its sheath, and I held it above my husband's body, and as tears poured down my face, angry and full of determination, regardless of the consequences, I brought that knife down and drove it into his heart. Again, and again, and again. As I continued recalling the events that had concluded mere moments ago, a strange sort of calm began to spread across my goose-pebbled skin, soothing the burning nausea and relieving the crippling fear that held me hostage. With a silent breath, I stood up and again surveyed the scene of my crime. Only this time, I wasn't looking at my consequence. Instead, I was seeing something altogether different, something utterly surprising. Surprising because, after all, I'd wanted out of this world, hadn't I? I'd wanted to be free from this fear, from the pain, not just from that of my husband, but from the world we now lived in. I wasn't built for it, wasn't built to survive in times of strife. I was weak. I always had been. Only because of Evelyn had I made it this far. Only because of her had I not ended myself long ago. And now I was free. I was finally, blessedly free of this man. "You were a terrible man," I whispered fiercely. "Not a man at all." I'd known a good man, a true man. I'd loved him with all of me, and in return he'd loved me with all of him. Ours had been a partnership, a friendship, and a love affair all rolled into one. What I had lacked, he'd had in spades, and what he'd lacked, I'd made it my mission to make up for. And never once had he touched me out of anger or perversion. That had been a marriage, and this had been a fallacy. A single-sided, self-serving game. This had been torture masqueraded as a duty to the continuation of the human race. Killing him? That hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been born of fear, but of anger. Killing him had been a necessity, a necessary evil. For the first time in my life, even if it meant the end of it, I'd finally done something brave. I'd finally saved myself. With my bearings back, a steely resolve firmly in place, I turned away from what was left of the man I'd hated, from the life I'd detested. As I walked slowly toward my dresser with the intention of dressing, Evelyn's face once again invaded my thoughts. Knowing I would be leaving her alone, a sliver of guilt wormed its way into my newfound resolution. She was not without friends, but they were all the same, fair weather and self-serving. Survival their only concern. For so long, all Evelyn and I had had was each other. We trusted each other, depended on each other, reminded each other of a life now long gone. Shaking my head, I shoved those feelings away. It was too late to do anything about it now. The damage was done, and Evelyn? She would survive this too. Fully clothed now in tattered jeans and a threadbare thermal top, I turned toward my mirror and let out a shaky breath. I didn't recognize this woman. The blood-spattered, bruised, and beaten-down woman. The same long dark hair fell past my shoulders. The same wide brown eyes stared back at me. The same pale, freckled skin shone white under the moonlight. Yet I didn't know her. I didn't even want to know her. Turning away from my reflection, I surveyed the room once again as my nails dug bloody half-moons into my palms. Then I took another deep breath. "Help!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. "Help me!" A muffled shout sounded, followed by banging on the door and then a loud crash. They'd come now. They'd see what I'd done, and they'd take me away. Deliver me to my last stop on this long and twisted road. Chapter 2. Evelyn. Jamie pressed my back against the wall, the cold bricks digging harshly into my heated skin. His kisses were persistent, never-ending, and I willingly took them, devoured them, greedy for more. I was always greedy for more of him. The more of him I had, the more he'd wash away the bitter and hollow taste my so-called husband left behind. I needed Jamie right now, needed him like a drug that could take me away to somewhere new, to somewhere else, other than here with a man who repulsed me, in a life I hated. Jamie's mouth moved from my lips, traveling down my chin and neck, pushing my thin cotton blouse to one side and exposing more of my flesh to his voracious kisses. His hot breath danced across my skin, lighting my nerves to his every touch. My hands dragged through his hair, my leg wrapping around one of his, pulling him closer. He groaned deep in the back of his throat, while his hands palmed my breasts in hunger. It was a sound that I loved to hear, a sound that ignited a fire in me, driving me onward to hear it again. Lowering his mouth to my chest, he pulled free my breast, sucking and biting on the hard nub of my nipple. I groaned again, wriggling beneath his weight, feeling as if I couldn't take another second of his teasing. Jamie. I said his name, loving the rough sound that followed from him, a satisfied rumble from deep inside his chest. "Again," he murmured, his mouth resistant to leaving my nipple. "Jamie," I repeated breathlessly. He didn't need to ask. I would have said it anyway, would have screamed it over and over again. His name was an aphrodisiac to me, the lone word having so much incomprehensible power over me. It controlled me, controlled my body, and I felt myself melting more, succumbing entirely to his every touch, growing increasingly impatient for more of him. Yet, even as hypnotized as I was by this man, my thoughts still turned often to Mason, my husband. His touch was still fresh on my body, his smell still potent in my nose. I could almost feel his fat fingers still pressing against me, intruding and eager, and it made my stomach heave. This was when I needed Jamie the most, to replace Mason's taste and Mason's touches with his own. Whereas Mason wasn't attractive, Jamie was sinfully so. Whereas Mason was a good 10 years older than me, Jamie was 33, only 2 years older than I was. No bath had ever done the trick quite like Jamie's rough and zealous hands, and his amazing mouth, always eager to please. "Eve." My eyes opened slowly, and I found Jamie watching me with hooded eyes, a grin dimpling his face. Reaching for me, he rubbed his thumb across my bottom lip, pulling my mouth open for him. "Where'd you go?" he asked. Calmer now, I smiled at him. "Nowhere. I'm right here." His grin grew, and then he claimed my mouth once more, his hands deftly moving toward the hem of my skirt, pulling it up and dragging my panties down in a move both proficient and explicit. My own hands moved to his belt buckle, unfastening it quickly. With practiced fingers, I undid his button, excited to free him from his clothing, excited to feel him pressed up against me, pressing up inside of me. My breath shuddered free from my lungs. I wanted him. God, I wanted him. Needed him. And then he was there, hard and ready for me. I whimpered as he gripped my thigh, lifted my leg, and eagerly pressed himself inside me. I sighed, my head lolling to one side, granting him access to the tender skin on my throat. He whispered sweet nothings into my ear as he moved inside me, his hips finding a perfect rhythm against mine, biting down on my lower lip, stifling my cry of pleasure. I allowed Jamie to override Mason's touch, the ugly memories floating away with each pounding thrust that Jamie gave me. He breathed heavily, a rumble stirring low in his chest, almost sending me over the edge. "Eve!" I opened my eyes, my body freezing in the midst of my breathless panting. Jamie leaned in to kiss me again, but I shook my head and silently mouthed, Wait. Several moments ticked by. Eve! This time my name resonated through the walls and I paused, my breath catching in my throat as I waited to hear my name called out again. Straining my ears, my heart thudding wildly in my chest, I listened intently for any sort of noise. I heard it then, the distinctive sound of footsteps coming quickly up the path, the gravel crunching beneath boots. Someone was coming. Shit! I hissed, shoving Jamie away hard enough to cause him to stumble backward. Shit! I repeated, trying to compose myself, the loss of him inside me already too strong. Someone's here. A soft knocking sounded, echoing from the front door and through the dark and nearly empty house. Jamie glanced around the room, his eyes suddenly wide and wild with worry. He grabbed his pants and began pulling them back up his legs, though I was glad to see that he looked just as flustered and red-faced as me. Shit! I cursed again, dragging my underwear back up my legs. Running toward the window, I looked to the ground beneath. Angela, one of the girls from the cookhouse, was standing at the door, her hands gripping her apron, violently twisting it. Glancing up, she found me in the window. "Evelyn, quickly!" she pleaded, gesturing for me to come down. Repeatedly, she glanced over her shoulder back to me and over her shoulder again, as if she was afraid that she'd been followed or worried that someone was watching her. Looking her over, I realized that not only was she still wearing her apron, but she also had flour in her hair, all telling me that she must have departed the cookhouse in a hurry. Fredericksville functioned like any other well-oiled machine. Everyone had a job to do, and everything worked fine as long as people did those jobs, and did them well. Just like before the infection, there were certain jobs that held more importance, more sway than others. Contrary to public opinion, it was my personal belief that every job held just as much importance as any other, simply because a leader could not exist without his citizens and vice versa. Even the children responsible for recycling our garbage were important, and in my humble opinion, much more so than the cruel men in charge. Not everyone shared my belief, though. My husband, the superior bastard that he was one of the many men around here always looking down on anyone he believed to be lower than him. Turning away from Angela, I found Jamie sliding his military jacket over his broad shoulders, his pants once again buttoned. Realizing another of our few and far-between moments had ended, a pang of regret passed through me. I watched him tuck his gun back inside its holster until his gaze finally found mine. Smirking, and without another word, he turned away, already heading for the stairs. No kiss goodbye, not even a longing glance over his shoulder. I wanted to be pissed about his indifference. I should have been pissed. My adoring husband always gave me a kiss goodbye, whether I wanted one or not. Yet Jamie gave me nothing. Nothing to cling to when he wasn't here. Nothing to tide me over while Mason demanded I be his adoring wife. As was his usual M.O., Jamie just left, leaving me desperate for more of him. I heard the soft click of the back door as it closed, signaling Jamie's departure. Yet I continued to stand there, waiting for one more minute, the longest of my life, before descending the stairs, taking the steps two at a time. I shook my head, dismayed. That was too close. We were getting reckless. Or at least I was, although I wasn't exactly sure if I cared anymore. No, scratch that. I did care. My thoughts veered to Leisel, my best friend. She was the only family I had left, and I couldn't deny that I still, in fact, cared. I had to care, for her sake, because if I didn't, she wouldn't have survived this place, this world. Her dependence on me and my strength could grate at times, but then I couldn't fault her so completely. I had dark days of my own during which I longed to end it all, to eat a bullet, finally shutting the world out. Then I would think of her, and would be unable to go through with it. In a way, I guess you could say we were constantly saving each other. We'd promised each other, back when this all had begun, when the world crumbled right before our eyes, taking with it everything we'd ever known, everyone we'd loved.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?